So we're live. Now I'm gonna share the link. Okay. Link. Then I can. Where do you want it? I can share it to you using Messenger, or we have a private
Yeah.
chat kasi here. Okay.
No, but I can't see the private chat eh.
Sige, I'll send
So, Messenger.
Messenger na lang.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yan, got it.
Kaya Atty Ahmed na rin.
No, we have the same one. So that she'll take care of that one.
Okay.
Yan.
Yun.
Bakit walang share? Copies. Yan. Yan.
All right.
Got it. All right. Let's go.
Just say
Let's
when,
do this.
attorney. Let's do this. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I'm just gonna. We'll start with an intro here, and we usually start the program with this one. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Welcome to Istoryang Futbolero. My name's Ron Poblete. And tonight we have two very special guests for the program. It's been a while since I last saw two of my, used to be my co-workers back in the day when we were at the PCOO with Asek Moka and Byron, who is now called Banat Bay.
Yeah. Ano. Yeah.
Banat Bay. So I just want to thank first and foremost, I'd like to thank Attorney Trixie and Attorney Ahmed for joining me on Istoryang Futbolero. You guys, I miss you guys. It's been a while, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Si Attorney Ahmed, kababayan ka to, Ginabaw. So, we have this something that we share ever since we started working together back in the day. So, si Attorney Ahmed, di ba? What's the word for that, Attorney Ahmed? We are like brothers. So, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for.
Yeah. So let's start first with the much talked about conversations on social media. Of course, the issue started when 2 weeks ago they began deliberations on the proposals of the HB 2 by Attorney Trixie when Congress
resolution of both houses number 2.
Yun, Yun. So they started the ballot initiative already started even before. The president ever since has always espoused federalism to change the constitution. They call it cha-cha. It's a bad word. That's why everyone in government refused to use it, but it's stuck for a long time. That it's cha-cha, charter change. But of course, the president has a very good reason why he wants to change it, and unfortunately the momentum was briefly interrupted because of the pandemic, and so this January there was a change of leadership. Actually, there was a change of leadership back in October. New speaker. The new speaker is of course Speaker Velasco. Alan Velasco, and now they decided that they will pursue this economic charter change or amending the economic provisions of the Constitution. Now, syempre, attorney, hindi naman lahat tayo nag-agree sa mga ginagawa ng Kongreso at hindi ko mabiblame si Atty Ahmed kung meron siyang mga hinagpis or mga mga kumbaga concerns sa mga nangyayari sa Kongreso kasi may kita naman natin talaga Attorney Trixie, 'di ba, sa surveys pa lang of all the branches of government, medyo nasa huli ang Kongreso when it comes to confidence coming from the public. But although when si APC took over, medyo nag-improve yung imahe ng Kongreso. Kaso pag when we talk about charter change, I'm sure the two of you have very valid reservations as to how it should be done. Let me start with the question: are you both for charter change or constitutional reform? Attorney Trix,
Yes.
let's start with
Well,
you.
okay. Yes, of course. There's a lot to be changed, but there's also a lot of work that Congress has to do. So, for example, what do I want to change about the Constitution? Number one would be to allow the president and the vice president to run as a tandem and be elected
Yes,
as a tandem. Diba? Yung mga
yes.
ganyan. What else? Amend the right to privacy to include the newer provisions, because the right to privacy was limited to privacy of communications and all that, but the concept of privacy has expanded. So
Mm.
what else?
Wait, that's the first time I
um,
heard this, Attorney Trix, this type of proposal. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
yeah, well, it's a bit complex once you discuss. For example, in the United States, they were able to call out the right to have an abortion by deriving it from the right to privacy. So medyo ano yan, medyo that I'm not saying that it's about abortion. I'm saying is that there are areas of privacy that have not been even talked about in our jurisprudence. So that's one thing, to be able to expand that right. Ano pa ba? Recognition, for instance, of genders, the taking away the state interest in a marriage. Kasi
Oh.
that's why the Solicitor General has to appeal any decision of the RTC to annul a marriage. The state has to protect it and to appeal it before the court. That's how difficult it is to even get an annulment. That's why we don't have divorce. So maraming
Mm.
ganyan, maraming there's certain things in the Constitution, lots of things that need to be looked at.
Okay.
So, but in this case, we disagree with how the Congress is doing it. Not so much about some parts about the what, diba? But mostly about the how and the drafting of the resolution.
Mm. All right. How about you,
Hmm.
Attorney Ahmed? What's your take on this? I've read. I think I've read most of your post about this, and your public disagreement with our friend Orion, who's a big proponent of federalism and the Fed Parl movement of the Correct movement. His group,
Mm-hmm.
the group that he actually helped organize and set up back in, 10 years ago. So I kind of get it, but I want to hear from you, Attorney Ahmed. What is your contention as far as the move from Congress is concerned?
First, I would like to express that I am for this charter change,
Okay.
right? And I do believe that I have more proposals. I have more things to propose to be changed in the Constitution than the RBH2.
Mm.
But that said, since I was not asked for my opinion or for my proposals, then I just nitpick the ones that they made. For example, the ones that were submitted by the RBH2. And most of the things that I saw in it were measures that would purport to serve a certain purpose, to solve a problem. For example, in economics, the economy, section 12. But the way they do it and the way they presented it uh, as a proposal seems to me to be like haphazard and not already thought of and stuff like that. Because when we raise certain questions about these things, of course, no one answered except Orion, who is not the proponent of all these things. Like I understand, he is the expert, or he is the one who's been historically working on the Fed movement, but we are not talking about FedParl, and I earlier agreed with him on FedParl, and I agreed with him. I agreed to help him on this thing. And then when we made our comment on the RBH2, especially on the Section 12 amendments, he was the one who answered, and clearly his answers did not traverse the things that we asked about. So that happened and stuff like that, and then. The rest of that was just really pure fun, It's not
Yeah, I
serious, I
know.
don't think.
Yeah, I've been telling him because when we were having conversation about this whole exchange, no, because I know you for a fact, Attorney Ahmed, na that's your character on social media. You enjoy like saying all these things. That talagang sometimes it's outlandish, but may tama eh. May kahit pa maano, it's very entertaining, at least for me. But if you're the object of that kind of siguro rhetoric or or hirit, depending on your siguro personality, you might get offended. And I understand why Ryan is also reacting the way he's been reacting is because of the fact that he's very serious about this. He's very passionate about this campaign. So ako, sabi ko nga kay Ryan, look, you know, you are actually you are almost the same personality, but you have disagreements that you should allow each other to have disagreements because it doesn't mean if we belong to the same group that we have to agree with each other all the time. Diba? And it's good that attorney you are challenging the proposal because that's what we need. We need discussion, further discussion on the matter.
Fact, let me interrupt a while. As a matter of fact, I am staying with Trixie and I. What we are doing is raising these questions, right? And we wait for answers, for solutions, for people to propose. Okay, we will answer that part of your question because you raise sovereignty and private ownership and all that. So we wait for solutions to our problem. Although, if you really ask us, we do have solutions for those questions. I mean, we don't ask questions we can't answer. So we can solve those problems. But we don't let it on, ahead of time. We don't tell people, look, we can solve these things. Why? Because we are not part of these things. We are not part of Congress. We are not part of the people who propose the RBH2. So they will have to ask us or beg us for all these things. Diba? Yes, Trish.
Attorney Trix, your thoughts on this? Because obviously, I actually mentioned this right to Orion that you cannot prevent people from issuing statements or comments on a current proposal that will have long-term ramifications to our country, and also you can't help people comment on something. I'll be commenting on something that they have limited information on kasi si Attorney Trix and Attorney Ahmed obviously are not part of the IATF and they don't know the details of what went on for the last couple of years. So you
IATF,
actually, Attorney Trix, it's the IATF for Constitutional Reform. That's headed by the ILG. So I don't know if you remember this before. We had this conversation probably a year and a half ago. I was inviting you to take part in the parang a roundtable discussion with some of the experts who are part of that IATF. But unfortunately, nagkaroon ng pandemic and we were supposed to discuss this. So I can't really blame you, the two of you, if you will base your criticism on the limited information that you have of on what happened during this time. What's your take on that, attorney?
well, given that there probably were prior discussions about it, what we have before us is RDH2. So
Yeah.
we can comment, regardless of what went on the draftsmanship, on what has been included, And as a matter of fact, the changes. So if you will take a look, all we have to do is compare, for example, the objective of RBH2, which states that it includes things like the pandemic and opening up the economy. So that's not a problem for us. The objectives are very real. And the problem is that the objectives and the method and the what they're doing with the Constitution do not exactly harmonize. So we don't even see where the pandemic fits in, okay? Except to say that the pandemic needs to be funded, and therefore, in order to fund that, you need more foreign direct investments.
Yes.
Now, given what we have, all right, the foreign direct investments are supposed to be encouraged by amending certain provisions of the Constitution. Now, why did that? When we first began looking at this, we had to take it apart. What do we know about the restrictions of the Constitution and what
Yes.
exactly are being restricted? But if you look at the RBH tool, what they have chosen are not those items that are restricted. For example, the
Mhm.
big push was for the lifting of the 60-40 requirement.
Yes.
It appears that the public perception is that all industries have to have a minimum of 60-40 sharing for any foreign investor that comes in.
Mhm.
However, for the 60-40 requirement, there are only 5 areas that where it is required. Private land ownership, education, public utilities, private radio communications, and natural resources, the
Mm.
exploration and exploitation of natural resources. The rest, if they're not covered by the 100% or the 25%, sorry, the 30%,
Mhm.
then it means that 100% foreign ownership is allowed for any of those concerns. So
Mhm.
what were the others? Um, the ownership of lands that belong to the public domain are never private, which means even Filipinos cannot own lands of the public domain. And what are these lands? Timberlands, forest lands, mineral lands, national parks. Okay, I'm sure you can see here where we're getting at. These
Yes.
areas that cannot be owned are suddenly being opened up by RBH2. Okay. It's not owned by Filipinos. I mean, except in the sense that the state owns it. It's not owned privately. Like I cannot build a house in forest land or timberland. Do you remember
Mm.
Boracay? When they were
Mm.
cleaning up Boracay, the
Yeah.
president was very, very angry over a resort that was built inside of forest land. Okay. And then the DNR came back after they'd been ejected, and they were back there. So the president got so mad, he wanted them fined, he wanted them jailed, he wanted all of that. Why? Because he wants the strict implementation of the protection of our forest lands. RBH2 is going to allow not just the foreigners to own forest lands, but also Filipinos. Say goodbye to your forests.
Mm.
Right. So what is actually happening here is under the guise of the term unless otherwise provided by law,
Mhm.
you are actually giving Congress all of the discretion to give away lands that belong to the public domain.
Mm.
Right? So
Okay.
that is our contention. It isn't even about foreign direct investments because that particular provision in RBH2 isn't about foreign direct investments. It's about the locals also. These are not even opened up to anybody. Now, I'm sure everybody will agree that we need national parks. There's a reason we preserve them. There's a reason we preserve our forest land, our timberland, and our mineral lands. Um, this was not even in any of the discussions. Yeah? It's not even in the whereas clauses. It's not even in the intention. If the intention was to open up for FDI, why are you including lands of the public domain?
Public domain.
Diba?
Diba?
And then if you
And if
include
you include
the other
the
matters, for
other
instance, what
matters, for instance,
areas
what
are we really
areas
opening
are
up
we
for
opening up
FDI?
for FDI?
I'm hearing
Yeah.
an echo,
I'm
so I
hearing
have
an
to stop
echo, so
here.
I have to stop here.
Uh,
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 Hang on. I don't know what
Hang
it's
on. I don't know.
okay.
Um,
Um,
30
continue.
settings of
Yeah.
Yeah.
usually it echoes when you're using the speaker.
When when what? Is it mine?
Is it mine?
Let me test. Attorney, can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me.
me? Yeah, you can hear me.
Okay, not you.
Not you.
Okay, Attorney Ahmed. Attorney,
Ah.
can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Si Attorney Ahmed ang culprit. Kaya nag-echo.
Okay. Okay. There it
So,
is.
yeah, I'll just unmute Attorney Ahmed when it's his time to to talk. Okay, that's good. Attorney Trixie, at least it's clear what your contention
No,
really
I
is
have to
about.
add one more
Sige,
thing. I have to add
go ahead.
one more thing. The
Okay.
60-40, okay, most people think that this is what's holding us back. And that's really not a problem. But if you
Okay.
take a look closely at the 5 areas, what are those 5 areas that are covered by 60-40? Yun nga, private domain, lands that are privately owned. That means
Mm,
the land where your house is standing on. That
right.
means the land, well, in any private capacity. So kung kunwari, I have property and Congress says, okay, you own that unless otherwise provided by law. It means that Congress can say you no longer own that land at any
Oh,
time.
okay.
Yes, that's what
All
it
right. All
says.
right.
And that's what people don't seem to be getting. That's why we're opposing this. We have no opposition to things like education, although there are some people who do oppose that. I think
Mm,
that private schools need a good infusion of foreign equity. Yes.
yes.
What about public utilities? How much are
Mm,
we willing to include
yes.
in
Mm,
public utilities? For me, that should be open to discussion. No question about that. Yeah, go ahead by all means. So let's all lift, even if we lift all of that, radio communications, but
mm,
reserving things like natural resources, because I think everybody agrees that we save our natural resources for ourselves. So
mm,
natural resources and private lands. The rest, open up. But if the public also wants sige, natural resources and private lands, I don't mind that as long as it is very clear what Congress intends to do. But Congress will not tell us that because what they
right.
said is as long as it is provided provided for by law, which means Congress can make a law and use their own discretion without asking us, or even if they ask us, we can railroad a law, and that's what we're voting for, to allow them to make that kind of call at any time. Diba?
Mm,
They're not
okay.
even giving us 60-40. Take note ha, people are saying lift 60-40, lift 60-40. By all means, if you want to do that. But Congress isn't even saying they're going to do that. They're
Mm,
saying unless otherwise provided by law. So they
mm,
get to choose lift ba or not lift. It's still with them. We did not give anything new. We're not giving anybody anything new. We're just moving it from the Constitution to Congress and leaving it up to Congress. What if Congress says, I'll wait another 50 years? There are
mm,
provisions in the Constitution that have never been made into law. One is the anti-dynasty law. It's been in the Constitution
yeah.
since 1987, but
Yeah.
no law has been made ever to pass that. Diba? The Land Use Act has been in proposal since what? Since the 10th Congress. That's how many ba? Times 3? So what? Almost, how long
Mm,
has the Constitution been in place? There's been no Land Use Act since ever since. Okay, but
yeah.
it's been proposed for a very very long time. So yun yung sinasabi namin is that because it says only unless otherwise provided by law, Congress isn't telling us what they're going to change, just where they're going to change it in the Constitution.
Okay.
Mhm.
Very valid points, Attorney Trixie.
Uh,
Actually, um, there are a few things there that I want to discuss with the two of you. But good thing that you accepted the invitation because we want to talk about it one point by point. I'm hoping that you guys have the time to discuss it tonight on Istoryang Futbolero. I know this is very contentious, and like I said kanina
mhm.
earlier, pag pinag-usapan chacha, allergic ang tao sa chacha eh. And that's been
Uh,
branded by obviously
uh,
the fake of the Constitution as a way for people for politicians to use to extend their terms, but which is not the case right now. First of all, it's actually si Presidente mismo ay gustong baguhin yung Constitution dahil
Okay.
hindi na siya akma sa
I
ating
think
panahon. Mm.
yes, of course. Who doesn't want it? But we have to identify the areas. For example, people think, as yet, one counter proposal is that delete the entire Article 12, and Ahmed has a lot to say about that. So I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah,
But
nabasa
they
ko.
want that it will be done by legislation. Now,
Yes.
here, let me explain. Some foreign investors, and this one I actually interviewed because they were supposed to be my witnesses in the coup d'etat hearing of Sunny Trillanes et al., where I was representing one of the accused.
Okay.
One of the aspects of coup d'etat was to explain that there was that foreign investors were scared because of the attempt in the Okud mutiny. So I
Mm.
actually had witnesses for that. One of them was an investor. Well, they put in was the German manager of they make semiconductors in Laguna, and he was supposed to testify. And part of that testimony was that the Oakwood event was something like what 2 or 3 days that didn't cause a blip. What did cause a blip in foreign investments with them that scared off their bosses was more the Piatco case. They said the
Mm.
problem with doing business here is the inability to predict what is going to, what the rules. Because of
Mm.
corruption, diba?
Mm.
Because of corruption, you can follow the rules, but they'll still not give you what you're supposed to be entitled to after following all of that. Diba?
Mm.
They did everything with the airport, they did all of this, and then somebody decided midstream to say, ayoko na, let's do away with you guys. And so we
Mm.
got sued and we lost. Okay?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
now imagine that if you make a law, let's say in the 18th Congress, you make a law, you tell investors, okay, come in, I'm going to give you this, 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 and this. And in the 19th Congress, somebody says, no, we're giving them too much. And you take that away. How many
Mm.
investors do you think will still have confidence in the country? Because that's
Mm.
what you're saying. If you want to legislate all of the restrictions and you leave it up to Congress to decide that, every Congress could have a different idea of how to redraft that law. And you can
Mm.
have laws that change so often every time Congress feels that there is a whim. That, okay, I got to scratch this itch. Let's
Mm.
change this law. And in the 20th Congress, what if they say, let's bring it back? And in the 21st Congress, say, no, let's take that away again. And so you will now have people not wanting to invest here because the laws can change so often. The Constitution gives us a measure of stability. It makes it more difficult because, yes, an uncertain business climate, an uncertain set of rules is also going to scare away your investors. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Sige, attorney, I have a few
uh,
dami kong questions. Actually, medyo it's like talagang nagsa-stack up na sa aking brain.
yeah.
Even before we decided to have this
Uh,
session with you guys.
uh,
Medyo dami kong gustong itanong sa inyo.
uh,
So, let me start siguro with the question about the way why Congress is doing it the way they're
uh,
doing it. Ako,
mm,
I'm privy to the campaign of the DILG, so I understand where that
mm,
phrase that they want to insert in the Constitution
mm,
comes from. Yung unless otherwise provided by law. Actually,
yeah.
um, that was suggested by the IATF for constitutional reform to Congress, and somehow Congressman si Speaker Velasco adopted the proposal of the DILG. Now the reason why it came about that way, ganun yung naging
Mm,
pathway nila, is because since the formation of the CONCOM headed by Chief Justice Puno, I don't know if you guys are aware of what went on when they came up with the draft, the federal draft. Si Presidente wasn't really how to put it. He wasn't satisfied with the draft that they came up with. Well, first of
mm,
all, one thing that we noticed about that is there was lack of consultation with the executive department. All the
Okay.
agencies weren't consulted when they came up with the draft. That's why when they gave the draft, everyone, including the very powerful economic cluster headed by Secretary Dominguez, opposed the proposed draft by that was
By the Constitutional Commission.
Constitutional Commission. And
Yeah, I
so
remember this.
CPRRD gave the job to Secretary Anyo to sort of like revise, fix the proposed draft. And unfortunately, Attorney Trix, medyo, you know how it is, right? We have to deal with the legislative body when it comes to changing the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And the Senate definitely is not very cooperative. They don't want
Who is
to.
not cooperative?
The Senate. I mean, in
Yes.
general.
They actually made a statement already saying that
Diba?
this is not a priority. As far back as 2019, they'd already
Yes.
said that charter change is not a priority. And I
Correct.
understand Senate President reiterated it very recently.
Yes. So medyo naging problema yun. So we ended up lobbying sa Congress and to get the feel of everyone, including the LGUs. So we went
Yeah.
around for like a year and a half. We went to all the different provinces, and we were able to accomplish one thing. At least the League of Municipal Mayors, headed by Chavit Singson, issued a parang a memorandum stating that they are supportive of the proposed changes that the IATF for constitutional reform proposing. Medyo tapos ang problema, Attorney Trix, Attorney Ahmed, ay hindi gumagalaw. So ang naisip is, look, siguro lalong-lalo na ngayon nagkaroon ng pandemic. Dahil walang movement at parating ang batikos ng kabila is hindi panahon for charter change. Merong pandemya, dapat COVID-19 yung asikasuhin. Hindi daw hindi daw charter change. Wala daw kinalaman ng charter change sa COVID-19. Now, we know na limited na lang yung panahon ni Presidente. At isa sa mga mandato na gusto niyang gawin talaga is to, at the very least, is remove the restrictions for foreign investments sa ating konstitusyon. Now, it's gonna take a while for us to be able to convince Congress. Walang problema. Senate ang problema natin, Attorney Trix, Attorney Ahmed.
And you can't do it without the Senate.
Yes. The thing is, I think, panahon ni Pinoy, malapit na palang itulak yung economic amendments. Pupirmahan na lang daw ni Pinoy. Pipirmahan na lang ni Pinoy, biglang nagbago isip niya kasi na-realize niya, uy, constitution to ng nanay ko. So parang binito niya yata yung bill na yun at hindi natuloy. Ngayon, binabalik natin
what exactly was in that draft that Noynoy was supposed to sign?
Almost similar to what they are proposing right now. Na medyo naging...
So let me get this straight. The Noynoy administration wanted these changes?
The Congress wanted these changes, but when it reached him, hindi niya pinirmahan. Hindi niya, kumbaga, binito niya yung bill.
Since it requires a charter change, there's no reason for it to go up to the president. That would be unusual. What would he be vetoing? It's not a law because you're changing the Constitution.
I think they were proposing to hold a constituent assembly, if I'm not mistaken, Attorney Trixie. Tapos
Congress doesn't need the approval of the president for a constituent assembly. So what were they proposing to the president? He couldn't even he can't even overrule Congress on constituent assemblies, and not even a constitutional convention. The people who will agree to a constitutional convention is the people. Kasi ang CONCON, kailangan to submit, some CONCONs, they submit for plebiscite just the holding of the CONCON itself. Okay. So it requires a vote of the people, not a vote of the president. So I'm wondering what went up to the president.
yun na nga, I think, na-mention lang sa akin to sa discussions kasi about this, and then the ones who were part of that Congress kasi, I think mentioned that almost, at saka yung ibang members of the previous administrations mentioned that this almost happened. But yun na nga, medyo hindi natuloy dahil kay Noynoy. In other words, I'm not specifically, I don't know what exactly happened or what it is that he vetoed or he stopped from happening. But hindi natuloy yung mga...
But Ron, you see, the problem isn't even so much as what we're pointing out in RBH2. It isn't that we don't want any change. It's that we want to know what you're going to change. By saying, unless otherwise provided by law, you're not giving us any idea of what the change is going to be. Furthermore, I apologize if this is going to be harsh, but this was really very badly drafted. Did you see the change in the in educational institutions? It says there that Congress can increase, etc., and then unless otherwise provided by law. Congress contradicts itself in that draft. So what were you thinking? Seriously. So there's something very badly wrong about the way this was drafted. Now, if this was drafted differently, for example, I gave an example. It's simple. You put there, you leave the lands of the public domain alone because clearly that's an insertion. This is not the intent because that has nothing to do with FDIs. Okay? Because even now, even Filipinos can't do that. Now, let's take it to the 60-40. It's simple. You don't take it out, but you indicate there that Congress can change the amount of the nationality requirement. And that's it. If RBH2 said that, we would have no opposition. But what RBH2 is saying is unless otherwise provided by law, which means Congress can do pretty much anything. It can give it away. But if you state there that the nationality requirements will be left up to Congress, by all means, go ahead. Because that is the intention of RBH2. At least that's what it says in the whereas clauses.
And another thing, attorney, kasi na I think si Attorney Ahmed can answer this, no? Kasi obviously you are concerned about natural resources and also land ownership, but there isn't anything indicated. At least from the standpoint of
really?
From the IATF of the DILG's proposal.
Well, I'm surprised at that.
Walang
because
land.
It's very clear.
Kasi
really?
si Presidente mismo
says in Article 12, Section 3 and Article 12, Section 2.
Pero attorney, sa kasi sa original proposal kasi ng IATF, DILG constitutional reform proposal, talagang sinusunod lang talaga yung gusto ni Pangulo na yes, baguhin natin yung i-amenda natin yung economic provisions pero walang kasamang lupa. Yun ang
and then why did you include that? It's there. At least two provisions. Three provisions, I apologize. So it's at least in three provisions. And I'm surprised at the draftsmanship of this. I know that for a fact that the president did not want land ownership. It was reiterated today by the Secretary of Finance, by Secretary Dominguez. So why don't we just forget about sections 2 and 3? And then proceed to Section 7 and Section 10. Section 10 is your most important part. That's where you can say Congress can set the nationality requirements. And you know what? I will even push for that. I'll campaign. I'll take to the hills if that's what you want to do. But you have to redraft it and tell us that this is what discretion we're giving to Congress. If you give it too wide, Congress can wake up one day, not probably in the next 2 years while Duterte is president, he'll probably slap them silly. But 2 Congresses from now, when Duterte is only a good memory for us, somebody wakes up and says, wait, I want to sell the Sierra Madre Mountains. And I can do that. Diba? And somebody can wake up and say, why should we let all of these water concessionaires be mere water concessionaires? Why don't we give them all our water resources and they can sell it back to us? Because that's what they can do under a provision that says unless otherwise provided by law.
Attorney Ahmed, what's your... Baka that's a trigger.
What's going on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you,
Ayan, there
Cas.
you go.
Yeah.
Sige, ako mag-mute.
Uh,
Well, then what do I say? Well, I don't know the question. I don't know your. What is
no,
your
talk
question?
about why they can't delete Article 12.
Okay, well, the problem we saw there, most of it is already said by Trixie. Okay, but I will have just to because these things that we said as objections to what RBH is trying to do in Section 12 were discussed by Trixie and myself. And most of the things, again, I said, were mentioned by Trixie. But the more theoretical problems that we encounter in these amendment proposals are even deeper than just a matter of public ownership of land, okay, or private lands or agricultural lands. It goes into certain principles in the Constitution, in political philosophy, that would that are the basis for democracy. Okay, that would be gone, or that would be really, really badly step, such that after this, if you are going to go through this, you won't have a recognizable democracy. Why? For example, you impact private ownership of private land, such that the Congress now has the power to do just anything to private owned land, and anytime they want to do that, they can. Um, the basis for the agreement of the people, the sovereign people, to surrender their rights to Congress and to government, including Congress and judiciary and everything, which is embodied in the Constitution. The social contract, in other words, is strengthened or bound by these principles of protection of private property by the people, such that if the state cannot promise to protect our ownership of these private properties, we will not enter into this social contract. And there is no constitution that will ever be written out of this kind of contract. Why? Because it is customary law from the very beginning of civilization of peoples when they started to think about forming governments and states, is that what the people owned, they already owned before there ever was a state. They own it before there were states, because people arrived there and they staked their claims on these lands, and that became theirs, and it was passed on from their ancestors to the modern descendants that we have now, like ourselves. Now, in the original contract, the first constitution that we ever had, we entered into the state with the state. That was one of the promises of the state. We will protect your ownership of these lands.
Correct.
And in return, the people will agree to sign this contract and therefore promulgate this constitution. Without that, there is no social contract, and therefore you destroyed democracy just by one fell swoop, like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it was careless, maybe it was intended. We don't want to speculate, but the same effect would obtain if we do not change it. It's the same effect, whether they intended it or they were just really too careless to see all of these things.
So
That's why.
let me just add to what Ahmed was saying, no? Just to make it a little clearer, kasi ano yung mic niya eh. What he's saying is that underpinning the entire idea of democracy is the concept of private land ownership. So that's the other issue that we have taken up. Kasi I understand, I think it's section 3 or 7 that says that it includes private land ownership in what Congress can just legislate, the private ownership of private lands. So nakalagay doon, unless otherwise provided by law. So which means to say that actually Congress has discretion over private lands, essentially making these private lands subject only to Congress's discretion. It's not really even private anymore. because the owner doesn't get a say when it gets disposed. The owner doesn't get a say when somebody wants to sell it, and that somebody is Congress. So how do we have democracy? Because people can own land privately. Diba? There is communism if you cannot own anything privately. So the whole idea was that, and in fact, in the Spanish colonial period, it gave rise to the idea of private land ownership for Filipinos gave rise to the Ilustrado class. Once they started titling lands, these lands could be mortgaged for other capital. They could be made productive and turned into the mega haciendas that you saw for a few generations back. And then by doing this, they were able to create wealth and to create wealth for themselves. So that's why even our constitution protects private lands, because that is the very essence of democracy and the essence of this particular economic system. So
Attorney
when you
Tricks,
take away the
yeah.
entire Article 12, which whether or not they intended it to be a mere a protection of the underpinnings of democracy, you take that whole, even Congress cannot legislate if there is no Article 12. Diba? Because the Constitution provides guidelines for what Congress can and cannot do. So if it is not there, then it is not clear whether Congress can do it or not. And we will have to resort to the Supreme Court. That doesn't
Mm,
make it any easier for your foreign investors, because
right.
then it makes it unpredictable.
Attorney Tricks, let's
Yeah.
retrace a little bit this conversation. No? Kasi, well, first of all, one of the things that Congressman Salceda said during the hearing is one fact though is our constitution is happens to be the kumbaga the longest yata of all constitutions in the world. Second lang daw ang India. Tayo daw yung
What do you
pinakamahaba
mean?
na konstitusyon. Ibig sabihin
That is true.
it's so detailed. I mean, it's constitutions though are not supposed to be that detailed. Sabi nila.
It's supposed to be broad strokes. That's what
Yeah.
I understand that that Professor Clarita Carlos says that. Well, that is a
Mm.
general rule in
Yes.
law. But
Mm.
constitutions are also written in accordance with the experience of a nation. Okay,
Okay.
for instance, there are things there that are not accidental, of course. Well, nothing there is accidental. When you say civilian supremacy is always supreme over the military, and the
Mm.
military is the protector of the people and the state, that is unusual because the elements of the state include people, territory, sovereignty, government.
Mm.
Well, if the people are already an element of the state, why is the military protecting the people and the state? Because in our
Mm.
experience, the military is sometimes called upon to protect the people as against the state, which is what happened in 1986. So this is
Right.
what I mean by what the Constitution reflects our experience. Now, the protection of the indigenous peoples is there because of our experience with Makling Dulag in the building of the Chico River Dam, and also
Mm.
the protection of our public domains. It was Makling Dulag who said, we do not own the land, people do not own the land, people are inherited by the land.
Mm.
Okay? The people do not inherit the land inherits its people. The land is eternal. And so there are some parts of our country that we preserve because that is owned by generations yet to come. We keep it for them. We don't even keep it for us. By telling Congress, by Congress saying, unless otherwise provided by law, we have given the patrimony of our children to the whims of Congress. Whether we trust them or not is immaterial. Di ba? Because we cannot tell what we have given to them. And they're not telling us what they're going to do with it. And 2 or 3 generations now, if that stays in our constitution, we will lose whatever it is we have reserved, and our grandchildren will have nothing. So
I
that
find
is
it.
why we're very passionate about this too.
Oo nga,
So
Attorney Tricks, I
saying
get your
things
point.
like, yeah, but because there's sweeping generalizations. You say constitutions shouldn't be so detailed and all of that. Yes, but it is also an expression of who we are. So if sometimes we want to change it, by all means, we have to change it because it has to reflect who we are now. But
Yes.
at the expense of the things that we must keep for future generations, I think not, diba?
But Attorney,
So
I'm a little bit,
yeah. Mhm.
I'm actually very surprised with the intention of Congress to change even that part. Because we honestly, I didn't know that part of the proposals that they actually wrote in the in the new one, in the new proposal from Congress, is part of that is actually Section 3 of Article 12. Hindi ko alam na meron pa silang dinagdag na kasama pati ah, yung ating public domain or
Yeah.
so hindi ko alam yung Attorney Tricks. Ang alam ko lang ang what we're trying to push for, at least from the standpoint of the DILG um, and the IATF, they're really pushing for FDI restrictions to be lifted. Pero yung
Okay,
part
not a problem. Section
land
10.
ownership, section 10 actually yung pinaka-importante. And I think on
Yeah.
education as well. And even
Section 7.
and pati media, if I'm not mistaken, is
That's under that's not under Article 12, that's under education. Diba? I think if I'm not mistaken, Article 14 of the Constitution.
right.
So it reserves for mass media, no, not 14, 16 yata yun. Yung 16 is culture and arts, education is 14. Yan. But it says that mass media is reserved exclusively for Filipinos.
It's interesting.
I have no ano with that. But like I said, why don't we put in that the Congress can set a different nationality requirement, a different percentage for nationality requirements for investors in that. Just nationality requirements. And you can stop there. So that way, Congress can decide if it's 100% or 0%. That will be within their discretion. And they can
Right.
determine that their discretion can be exercised with, if the discretion naman is abused, we can ask the courts. But if your purpose kasi nga is foreign direct investors, you want something more stable.
A little bit
yeah,
on
why not?
the land ownership, Attorney Tricks, kasi naalala ko lang bigla during the last, I think they're going to have another one this Wednesday, another hearing on constitutional reform, but constitutional amendments. Pero last Wednesday, when they had it, one of the congresswomen, I think it's Kimpo yata, or Congressman, basta they mentioned something about land ownership and why it's hard for, I think that's one of the major issues or hurdles for investors to come in, because they are not sure. They need to at least own the land that they are manufacturing in. Kumbaga,
So that's
parang
the
yung
60-40. That's part of Section 3. Pero yung nilagay ninyo kasi was yung unless otherwise provided by law, includes everything that came before it. Now, if all you wanted to do was to change the nationality requirement for foreign investors who to own land during the time of their investment, then you could have just taken that away from that paragraph and then
Right.
said na on this part, the Congress will determine the nationality requirements. Diba?
yan. Tama.
So I think
Attorney Ahmed.
the problem with RBH2 isn't so much the intent, but the draftsmanship. Diba? The phrase is really it's too broad. And even in law, the Supreme Court always strikes down laws that are overbroad. So because you don't know what you're getting. So if those were the provisions, then I would gladly point out to you that all you had to do is remove it from that paragraph and redraft it and then leave the nationality requirements to Congress.
Attorney Ahmed, knowing how things work in Congress, obviously you have your comments, and you have your criticism or constructive criticism towards how, like sabi nga ni Attorney Trixie, the draftsmanship of how they came up with this proposal. What is the next step so that our congressmen would know na, okay, medyo hindi na-miss natin tong part na to. Meron palang loophole dito na baka nga ma-abuse, maging contentious if they do move forward with this proposal. How do we go about this now, knowing that we have that inherent problem if we do proceed with this proposal?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Is it still echoing in your ears? All right. Okay. See, I told you earlier. I told you that we have the solutions. Trixie and I, when we post these questions, we already have the solutions in our heads. Okay. What does the Congress do about it? Well, they have to ask the people who knows the answer to these things. And well, I'm not saying that we are just the two of us, but that's what I'm talking about. You have to tell the public so that you can flush out those people who actually understand these things and who can actually help Congress phrase these out. All right, because because once because if we brought this to the people to be voted on with the explanation of how they understood it, all right, how they and not us, they understood it, and the people will believe them and vote on this in the affirmative. We are done for. We just asked to be run over by a tsunami, and we didn't even know about it because people did not understand to begin with. And what they told the people as an explanation was the half understood stuff that they wrote, and the people voted on the half understood stuff. And later on, when we are experiencing all of these things and the exercise of all these powers that we give to Congress, we suddenly realize, oh. But that I really hope that that doesn't happen because we caught it earlier now. And what to do about it? They have to listen. They have to stop being secretive, and they have to let us participate and hear us out. Because if they don't, then we will fight this by telling the people how to go about fighting this. So then again, one of my problems is as a result of this carelessness, I should say, is the imbalance of power. Because when Congress has been given so much power even over private property, that will impact the executive and the judiciary. And another of our principles in democracy is the balance of power, right? The separation of the three powers of government and the balance that is maintained among these three sources of power. And now you suddenly give so much power to Congress without balancing out by giving powers to executive, corresponding powers to the executive and to the judiciary to control this over influx of power now on Congress. So all of these things are basic philosophical political things that people at the helm of making laws in this country must understand. And it is my opinion that no person who does not understand these things must touch the Constitution unless somebody is behind them to teach them how to do it.
Well, Attorney Ahmed, the composition of the, Constitutional Commission headed by Justice Puno were composed of lawyers. Most of them were lawyers. um, so, I don't understand nga. Medyo, hindi ko lang maintindihan. Kahit na ganun kadami yung dapat nakakaintindi ng Constitution, hindi pa rin appreciate ng ating Presidente yung kanilang ginawang draft. Na
so I didn't either. It looked more like a document of compromise rather than anything that wanted to make a real statement. So I understand why the president rejected that. It was not acceptable. Ganito lang yun eh. If you're going to change things, by all means, go ahead and change things. Because what the president was saying here, you have the power to draft how we're going to change things radically from here on end. But they made, what I felt was that they made too many compromises. Instead of going whole hog on the changes and proposing things like, okay, let's become a parliamentary system, let's do this, let's do that. They made halfway measures as matters of compromise. And so you might end up with something that's neither here nor there. So that was the impression that the document gave me. I don't doubt that the president probably saw it as the same thing. So it's either you change things radically or you keep things the way they are, to figure something out. So it looks like the president chose to figure something out first. It wasn't, hindi kaya the way it was drafted. It was just too much of the same thing. So, but adding things that were a compromise, largely window dressing. So nobody would have been happy with that either.
Right. So, Attorney Trix, what do you think about the comment, the argument about our constitution? Like we discussed kanina, what I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
kanina nga, yung constitution natin is very detailed, and it covers so many things. And you said that this is based on the times it was written. Obviously,
On our experience,
in
yeah.
our experience, it's a reflective of what we were experiencing when it was framed by our by the Constitutional Commission that were set back in the day. But now, sabi kasi ni Attorney Ahmed rin, I remember his argument with Orion. Si Orion wanted to remove the entire provision on economic restrictions. Pero ang tanong kasi dyan, Attorney Ahmed, Attorney Trix, tayo lang daw yata ang konstitusyon na merong ganung klaseng mga restrictions on foreign direct investment. Is that
Okay.
parang
Or is that even a fair comment, Ron? Look, we're also the only constitution that protects its cultural property under Article 16. The only constitution, according to Justice Hardelesa, that actually puts in conservation of our national cultural treasures and our works of art in our constitution. Even nations that hold their artworks in awe or are very protective of these things, they don't have it in their constitution. We have it in ours. Again, why? Because based on our experience, we have a tendency to destroy who we are and everything that represents us. So why are the FDI restrictions put in there? Because at the time, the Constitutional Commission understood that that they were slightly drunk under and I don't mean that in the literal sense, with this newfound feeling that suddenly they were free to do everything that they wanted, but also at the same time they couldn't put in there that we could do anything that we wanted. The economy was not exactly in ruins, because the reason we were able to actually have a people power revolution was because the economy was improving under Marcos at the time. People were already, alam mo yan, it's like Maslow. When you're really, really poor, you have no time for all of these things, di ba?
right.
But once people were a little more wealthy, they had a little more improvement in their lives, they could actually spend the time going to rallies. At least that was the reality at the time. They also understood that there would be some people who'd go a little nuts once they realized that they were the ones holding the reins of power. And so they did put in these restrictions. Some of them also were restrictions, I understand, might have been calculated to protect certain industries. And like I said, we have no issues about taking out those restrictions. But what we do have issues with is with the RBH2. So yeah, by all means, if you want a shorter constitution, sure, but I want to know what it is that it says. And if we're going to delegate power to Congress, we have to set the standards, because that's what the Constitution does.
Right. Okay.
Diba?
That's actually a good comment, Attorney. It's funny, somebody from our message board says, when you mentioned Maslow, Nikki Argonza said, "Oh my God, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Who would care about artwork if they have nothing to eat?"
Well, that's because you're taking what I said before and what I said later, and putting them together. Those are two separate things. Ron was saying that we are the only constitution that has FDI, but I was talking about we also have the only constitution that protects its own artworks, diba? So, but I'm not saying that that's what we protect ahead of everything else. And the protection of artworks and all of that in our heritage has nothing to do with the FDI restrictions.
Right.
So that's not what we said.
Actually, Attorney Dick, what's so clear so far at this point, no, in our conversation is, hindi naman, like I told Orion when we spoke about this, yung kanilang argument ni Attorney Ahmed.
Yeah.
Parehas lang yung iniisip nila kasi by and large kasi si Orion is just pushing to remove the FDI restrictions. Hindi ko nga alam tong about land ownership na issue eh. to be honest with you. So kaya nagulat ako na ba't sila nag-aaway? Nag-agree naman sila dun sa part na yun, sa FDI restrictions. Pero bakit umabot sa,
No,
sa
well, I think it really was just a lot of in the heat of the argument. During
okay.
the heat of an argument, you start to raise things, even if it is not a position that you have taken. I think
Ah,
that's what happened here. So, yun nga yung inaano. Every time we say, but I'd really like to point out something. When we amend or revise the Constitution, we target specific provisions or we come up with an entire new constitution
right.
by itself. Well, I have no problems with any of that. And I would like to make this absolutely clear. We're not protecting the 87 Constitution. In part, we are explaining it. But our main objective, our main objection, I'm sorry, is RBH2 and the bad craftsmanship that has brought about this debate, this particular discussion. Again, I reiterate it to the people who are angry with us. I understand your anger, but what I'm saying is that we're not against changing the constitution. We want a more surgical and a more precise means of delegating the power to Congress. Right?
It's good that
Yeah,
you're
it's not a
clear this up,
problem.
Attorney Trix, because
Uh,
I think
yeah.
what went on there is no different from people exchanging text messages to each other, and then it tends to be misinterpreted right there and then because it's all in on
No,
text.
well, yeah,
That-
but kasi social media lends itself to a lot of emotional responses. And so,
yes, that's
we understand that. Sometimes it happens to us also. And sometimes kasi we take a stand and then we become invested in that particular stand that we don't really want to listen to reason. We just want to hear somebody begging for mercy. Diba? You want to just clobber them over the head and say, shut up. But if you clear the air, but it happens. It happens, and I understand that this happens. I mean, we weren't born yesterday on social media, but
yes.
the point is, if we talk about it, even if we're fighting, ultimately the people benefit because we keep sharing information. But if we're too emotional about it, then we're not really learning anything from this.
Mm,
When it comes to changing laws or even creating laws, if you'll notice, Congress is a collegial body. If one person has a brilliant idea but is incapable of selling it to his colleagues so that they're going to vote for it, then that proposition is dead in the water.
yes.
So, and that's
Yeah.
the same also on social media. If you do not understand that you have to convince somebody and you just get overly emotional and invested in your position, then nobody benefits from the discussion.
Ako, attorney, wala akong problema sa alitan ni
Mm-mm.
Orion at ni Attorney Ahmed. I think what happened there is it brought to light important
Mm.
questions, diba, about this
Yeah, yeah.
proposal from Congress. And in this, we cannot take away
Mm-mm.
the fact that this is a very important kumbaga, proposal, and it's a very
Uh,
important thing that
uh,
needs to be discussed thoroughly.
yeah.
And ano man yung
It's actually kind of fun
di ba yung
discussing it.
away-away, bigla na lang
Uh,
nagkaroon kasi alam mo
no,
naman ng mga tao, pag pinag-usapan ng
uh,
constitution,
mm,
uh, it's a boring subject matter if we are being honest about it.
not for me. Not for
Not
me.
for you, obviously, but for the common folks.
That's my
Kaya,
highest grade in the bar.
ganun ba,
So
attorney?
yeah, that was fun. Yeah, yeah.
Hindi kaya
Thank
medyo
you.
nahirapan din ang government to promote it because
Uh,
on its face, talagang
uh,
may talaga siyang pag-usapan na walang taong
mm,
bigla na lang magzo-zone
uh.
out. Lalo na pag constitution na very complicated. And then
Kasi
so,
there's stories eh. The Constitution is actually a story in itself. Take the Bill of Rights. Right? The Bill of Rights, it didn't just pop up in 1987. It started at the turn of the century under the things like what we call the proto constitutions, the Tidings McDuffie Act. I'm sure you remember this from high school. The
yeah.
Tidings McDuffie Act and all of that. And if you look at the early days, our Bill of Rights actually reflects the Bill of Rights of the U.S. So, but except for two provisions. One of them is the right to bear arms. The other is the right to a
Mm,
jury trial. So, and
mm.
there's stories about that also. And then there's stories about why the laws are like this, and it's really fun to talk about it. So actually, when charter change came about, we saw this also as an opportunity to tell part of the story that is the Constitution. It's not the big bad wolf that we think it is. It's actually a lot of things. It's history, because the Bill of Rights didn't just show up looking this way. It looked like something else. In fact, at the turn of the century, we had barely any rights. In fact, we didn't have any rights at all. The Americans were occupying land that they owned, that it just so happened that we were there. And that's the other thing why we're saying that we don't we need to be more precise when we're talking about the discretion we give to Congress about land. Because when the case came to the Federal Supreme Court in 1911, there is a case of a sailor who went to the Philippines, went to the United States, and he was bringing with him 14 diamond rings. And he didn't want to pay duties on them. And it went to court, went all the way up to the Federal Supreme Court. He said he didn't have to pay duties because he was in U.S. territory, and therefore it wasn't an importation. And the Supreme Court said, actually, not exactly. The Philippines is not U.S. territory. It's private land owned by the United States government. And that's why we never had U.S. citizenship. That's why we didn't have rights at all at the start. That's why they imposed everything, because we were occupants of the land that they owned. Kumbaga, squatter tayo. So, so the proto-constitutions eventually evolved so that they recognized all of these. And then by 1944, 45, when they were recognizing our independence, they were no longer in the mood to say granting independence, but actually recognizing it. So these things also change over the years. That's why we changed the Constitution. That's why we agree that the Constitution should be amended or to be revised, because it has to reflect who we are now. But, like I keep saying, you don't give Congress all the discretion in the world to rip the ground off your feet, diba? Out from under your feet. Diba? You give them standards.
Based on your observation and your expertise, obviously you are well versed when it comes to the law. Why is it so hard for us? It's over been what, since 1987? It's been what, 34 years since we changed anything, even a comma or a dot in the Constitution hasn't been changed ever since. Why has it been very hard for us to do it? I mean, when we actually need it already.
I'm not the be all and end all. I'm not the ultimate answer to this. But what I have observed is that there's some people who are emotionally invested in it, which is ridiculous. But they're emotionally invested because they were actually there when the Constitution changed. So kumbaga, they were part of that experience. The full EDSA experience culminated in the 87 Constitution. So it was a whole year or so of activity of supposedly rebuilding the nation. I say supposedly because, syempre, with the distance of history, we know that there's certain things there that aren't really altruistic or weren't even real. It's part of it was fantasy, part of it is romance novel, and part of it was real. Diba?
So true.
So in the same way that we have to keep reviewing our history, we also have to keep reviewing our laws. But most people just think that it's too hard, the emotional investment. Okay, that's one part. The others are people like me who say, well, I want to see what you're going to change. So sometimes kasi, constitutional conventions, you say, okay, let's have a constitutional convention to change this and this part. And then during the convention, some wacko from left field says, well, why don't we change this also? And suddenly there's a snowballing effect, and then you end up with these really ridiculous provisions that you don't know what to do with. So part is the danger, the threat of the unknown and the wackos that can sometimes get elected into constitutional conventions, diba? And the hijinks that happens there. But for me, I think that that when the time is right, the time is right. I think this is one of those times. If we really wanted to update things, then But I prefer to go whole hog. Why stop there? Diba? If we're going to be fighting with each other, we may as well put in everything that we want to change. Why just this?
Realistically, if we are to do wholesale changes to the Constitution, how long will it take? Because yung yung discussions that are happening,
that's true.
Diba? Sobrang tagal siguro.
No, I understand that. And actually, I appreciate what Speaker Velasco is doing. I know most of you don't like him, but I appreciate what he's doing. What he's doing is he's building consensus. He's
Yes.
talked with the parties. He's talked with the congressmen. He's always going around and building, so that when it comes to voting on these provisions, then there'll be no more arguments or debates on it. So I understand that he knows what he's doing. He's making it easier, and that's why we're a little alarmed, because there will be few debates. There
Mm,
will be few discussions on this one,
mhm.
precisely because he has already built the consensus on this one, and nobody is really taking the time out to study the draftsmanship, unless there are some people invested in this particular draft. Diba?
Mm.
You're the one who said that the land ownership provisions weren't supposed to even be touched and included, and yet they are there.
No, the
Even
president
Secretary
allowed that.
Dominguez is saying, why is the land ownership in there? And from what I hear, because even before we began this debate, I called up people that you and I know
Yeah,
to find out, was this really the intention? And they said, well, no, the president will never agree to that.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
we went full steam. So yeah, the accusation that we're anti-Duterte is ridiculous, because actually we called up his people and asked if this was the intention, and it's, as it turns out, and thank you for confirming it, it was not the intention at all.
There you go.
Diba?
Yes,
I'm surprised na.
Actually, Attorney Ahmed,
So
sayang hindi ka nakasama sa ating conversation ngayon kasi I was about to
can you
ask.
hear?
No, I can't hear you. But I'm setting up my
Okay,
computer.
he's just setting up his computer so he can rejoin us.
Phone died.
His
Yeah,
phone
kasi
died, that's why.
Attorney Trix, yung next question kasi is about what the president, remember this,
Mm-mm.
it came out in the media, the Senate President, Tito Soto, mentioned a conversation with the president regarding
Yeah, about the party lists.
the party list. What is your
Yeah.
take on that? Is it about time that we, because there also ano kasi merong mga suggestions that we should just probably amend the party list law, but since that's part of the constitution, we need to amend the constitution for us to be able to change that, right?
Uh, yeah, the party list is there. It's in the Constitution. And so there's also a law that executes that portion of the Constitution.
Yes.
I understand, well, of course, there's a story behind that also, that the intention was to include, to be more inclusive, to include people that Teddy Boy says, the marginalized, the unpopular ideas. So this
Hmm.
was, it's utopic. Okay, it's part fantasy, but okay. I like the idea. Okay, di ba? You bring in the marginalized, the people who are underrepresented, the people
Hmm.
whose voice aren't even heard by current representatives. So
Hmm.
yeah, I get that. For me, that's exciting. That's good. That's pushing. It's affirmative action. However, the way it turned out is that it became a bastion of
Yeah.
people who are even trying to undermine the exact government that they're representing. I mean, ridiculous in the extreme. Plus, of course, the accusations of the NTF-LCAC, which, by the way, are not unsubstantiated, meaning
Hmm.
may evidence sila, diba?
Hmm.
Makes me, made me go back and look at the rules. And it turns out that our COMELEC has been exercising discretion all over the place. And they have
Hmm.
rules, and they're changing all the time. Like, okay, Magdalo, okay?
Yeah.
Originally, the Magdalo group was denied they were not allowed to be a party list because they had previously tried to overthrow the government. Diba? Let's not have
Yeah.
there's just no two ways about it. It was ridiculous. So they filed a motion for reconsideration, and the COMELEC changed its mind. They said,
Oh.
"Okay, you've been amnestied." Well, amnesty, of course, erases the crime, but that's not the point. It isn't the Magdalo corporation or the party that was amnestied. It was the individuals, and the
Hmm.
individuals may no longer have a crime, but the group that they represent still represents the same ideals.
Right.
So why did they allow it? I have no idea.
Hmm.
It's right there. It's okay. What about the other groups, the ones that they said no to? But it's like spin a win. Okay, let's see who we're going to approve today. Chuk, 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 diba? And oh, let's do this one. They represent this radical leftist group that once took up arms against the government.
Yeah,
Why don't
attorney,
we let them in?
attorney. So you're
It's the
saying
COMELEC's discretion. Yeah.
the problem is
Even
the
the
common.
Supreme Court decisions are ridiculous. Sometimes I apologize to the Supreme Court, but it is. They are. They keep changing. Yeah,
Okay.
even the how. Where did they come up with this totally random number that determines how many people get represented in this particular
Hmm.
party list? How
And you have
many,
to fill those
determining,
slots.
yeah, yeah, and I tried to make sense of it. Believe me, I tried, and even I can't make sense of it. I can make stories out of anything, but this is garbage. Seriously,
But
it's
attorney,
so random.
I find this very
So
interesting. How are the Makabayan bloc members or the organization that's under the Makabayan bloc able to circumvent the law? How are they
ah,
doing that? I mean, we
it's a
know.
matter of evidence, yeah. But we know it's not exactly admissible as evidence, di ba?
Yeah.
The everybody knows that you're helping the NPA, but you can't go to court and say, Your Honor, but we all know that they're like this, di ba? You
Yeah.
can't do that. So it's a matter of evidence. Now, it's because of the Human Security Act, right? We have the Human Security Act is as ridiculous as its name. Okay, instead of saying that we have an anti-terrorism law, we have a human security had that's been superseded by the Anti-Terrorism Act, which is better, actually much better. The Human Security Act favored the accused, favored the suspect. So we also have what we call an anti-wiretapping act that doesn't include things like terrorism, or didn't until we had the anti-terrorism law. So what the Human Security Act did was to give all the benefits to the accused and to the suspect and all of the protections of the law, and put imposed penalties of a fine of 500,000 pesos per day of an allegedly unjust or mistaken incarceration, which should only last about 3 days, which is so
Mm,
weird. And said that that's all you can do. And if you make a mistake, or if you jail somebody and it turns out later on that they're not a terrorist, the cop gets fined 500,000 pesos a day. Where? Who in his right mind would try to enforce it? So you have as a Human Security Act that nobody wanted to enforce, and in fact has only been used about one or two times, which is, I don't know, which is just
yeah. Go ahead. Go
out of
ahead.
this world. So we created an anti-terrorism law. So before that, kasi it was so hard to get evidence. You couldn't wiretap. Well, if you conducted surveillance, they would file a writ of amparo against you. And then even get all the documents that were the subject of the reports of your own surveillance. That's how bad it was. That's how they didn't put in a Human Security Act against terrorists. They put in a Human Security Act for terrorists. Seriously, I'm not kidding about this one. Plus, it took a long time to recognize the New People's Army as what they are, terrorists. Before, we called them rebels,
Mm,
insurgents,
mm,
things like that. Plus, in the old interpretations of the penal laws, the courts would give a special benefit to those who commit crimes in the name of political ideology. I remember
mm,
that the revised penal code was created in the 1930s. And in the 30s, they were recognizing things like the rebellions of the hooks and all of that later on. After the war. After the war, that's how the interpretation was going. And so instead of, let's say you commit murder in the course of committing rebellion, that carried a lower penalty because the crime would be rebellion, and because it was in pursuit of an ideal or an ideology, then let's turn the heat down a little. And so we end up with all of these people who think that rebellion is romantic, and a Supreme Court that agrees with them. And, and you have a recipe for an insurgency that lasts for 52 years. Diba? And look at the on February 2 there will be oral arguments in the Supreme Court over the anti-terrorism law. I'm sorry if I'm hijacking this, but you will see there that the arguments really haven't changed. The mindset of the people are still in that mindset that ideology is an excuse for committing all of these crimes. It's not.
mm.
It's not anymore. We have changed. So that's why it took so long. We didn't really want to.
Ironically, that's what made our constitution.
Yun, ironically, this kind of rebellion, sabi ni Atty.
No,
Ahmed,
that kind
oh, you can be heard.
temperament
Uh,
was what that produced the 1987 Constitution. Because the people who were drafting the 1986 Constitution, 1987 Constitution, were deep in these political philosophies, like the uh, uh, liberation theology at the time, and the beliefs of freedom and freedom fighting in South America and all of these things. So that was what's going on during the time, and eventually they actually did make it to the drafting of this constitution and how it is right now. So that the protectionism of land and industries is because of that also. It is a socialist principle that produced these kinds of things. But I'm not saying now that communism, socialism is bad right off the bat and across the board. What I'm saying is that if we put all of these principles in the Constitution, and now we find ourselves in a situation where this is very hard to sustain, this is not anymore sustainable, that we should change them. And I understand that that is the thrust of this charter change. But we cannot allow another of what happened in this present constitution to happen again in the next constitution. And this time, not because of the saturation of these principles, but of complete ignorance and carelessness in the drafting of these things. So, you see, whether or not they intended this with stealth or subterfuge in mind, we caught it. All right. We will not allow it if we had our way with it. So, but if this was a lack of knowledge, a lack of concentration, or just carelessness and negligence because they were uh, so busy looking at the politics of all these things, and therefore neglected to review completely the details of all these things and the ramifications of what it might do to our democracy, to the basic principles of freedom, then there's no sense in doing all of these things if we don't do it correctly. So that's why we are here.
I get that perfectly, Attorney Ahmed. I get your point. Siguro, but I think one thing that can be very assuring to say is that the president will not agree on anything that has to do with land ownership. And I don't think we should worry about that because even if they insert that in their proposal, and then it finally becomes a bill, and then they send it to the president, or they actually convene a constitutional or a constituent assembly or constitutional convention, siguro hindi papasa yan, Attorney Ahmed. Hindi mangyayari yung
Well,
landowner. Hindi- hindi-
well, I don't know. I'm sorry. We really cannot. We really cannot live it up to our ideals of trust and confidence in the officials, because that is the essence of this social contract, that we respect each other, that we will get a one up over the other. But that is also the impetus of getting into this contract, because we cannot trust ourselves to govern ourselves either, and we cannot protect ourselves by ourselves either. And we need a system that that does not involve every single one of us as the sovereign, but a few, or at least even one, and in a case of a monarch, to express our will through laws or through his will, that leader, and we will just have to obey him. But before we do that, we just really have to know what we want to give him so that he can use it to govern us. And if we are careless in that,
we give him too much power, and now we are left with nothing. We cannot even oppose him on certain things that may change. For example, in a process of movement of time, if we can't even quickly remedy these things because we were too careless in delegating his power, then he will slowly become a tyrant. And the solution there is no longer an amendment of the Constitution, but revolt.
Mm.
And I don't imagine we would want to do that. So that the sooner we do something about this, the more possible that we will make a revolution, more and more impossible. So there it is.
Uh,
If you want peace for your future children and for your future businesses and commerce and industries, do it right this time.
Um, whereas in sort of a conundrum here, Attorney Trix, Attorney Ahmed, kasi
Mm.
uh, one school of thought is let's do something very simple to in amending the Constitution so that it will clear the path for the more important changes that we need to, or we need to reform. But another side of that that's being taken by Attorney Ahmed is that we have to be careful because if we do something as drastic as coming up with a very simple term that can have very serious ramifications, paano yung future natin? Baka itong mga mambabatas natin abusuhin yung yung
Yun
provision
na
na
nga
yun,
eh.
'di ba?
Not only abuse, but they can also result in a situation where they have no power at all.
Mm,
Yeah, if you remove
Because it's so confusing, it's so general. They don't have sufficient standards to exercise the power, so they won't exercise it at all.
alam mo, Attorney Ahmed, ito yung explanation dyan kung sino nag-come up with ng idea ng unless otherwise provided by law. Galing yan dun sa IATF eh. Actually, galing sa ating grupo nag-propose niyan. The reason why they came up with that idea is because
aha, kidding.
kulang daw sa oras. Kulang sa oras and it's easy for Congress to agree on kasi it's
There you go. There you go.
they're giving Congress kumbaga the prerogative as to what law needs to be done or to be drafted para to support
Ayan yan eh.
whatever it is that needs
But
to be
that is exactly the problem, Ron. Of course, Congress will want that. Of course, Congress will say that.
Definitely. This is
Yeah,
politics.
that's what they want. They want all the discretion. But let me remind you, and this is something that we always discuss on our page and in our radio program, is that Congress has a lot of power. In case you haven't noticed, the last time that a congressman was removed from Congress, he wasn't even removed from Congress. He resigned. This was Congressman De Guzman way back under the speakership of Ramon Mitra. Diba?
Mm.
This guy was caught smuggling guns in the NAIA. And Congress didn't want to expel him, but he was convicted by final judgment. And only at that time did Congress decide now, okay, we have to expel them because this is so embarrassing already. So before they had to do that, he resigned. But you notice that the Senate and the House both have ethics committees, supposedly with the power to remove a congressman or a senator for disorderly conduct, or it's largely a disciplinary action. And this takes the place of an administrative action in the Office of the Ombudsman. So you can file an administrative case in the Office of the Ombudsman against any public servant, against any official, except our legislators. Because even if they're found guilty by the ombudsman and dismissed administratively, if you take that to Congress, they'll say that doesn't apply to us. This has to be filed in the Senate Committee on Ethics. Well, they will hold hearings for 6 years and then find him not guilty at the end of that. Right? So this is how powerful they are. Not only that, we have an Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act that punishes a conflict of interest. However, didn't you notice that some of our senators or congressmen with interest in certain television stations are weighing in on those certain television stations? In any other government office, these people would get their ass hauled to jail for this conflict of interest, especially if they get money from it, or even if they don't. Because clearly they should not be making decisions over which they have interests, even business interests of their own or their kids or whoever. And it
Right.
is only here that you will see a law being passed to create a corporation to benefit the son of a senator. Yeah? Do we get rid of our legislators? No. Does the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act apply to them? It should, but it doesn't. Which means that our
Mm.
Congress and our Senate has a lot of power. Not only power, they have a lot of influence. When was the last time, since Ramon Mitra's time, did we see a congressman go to jail or a senator? With the exception of Laila
Of
de
ano-
Lima, who is not yet been convicted by final judgment. And it took this kind of president to haul her ass to jail. Not a
Mm.
very pretty one, but, di ba? It took Rodrigo Duterte. Well, but any other, these they have such profound influence, even if they don't actually directly tell a judge na, oh, you should acquit me. Di ba? They don't actually tell the
They
judge,
don't
well,
do
this
it
is
that
my
way.
kid. They don't do it that way, but sometimes just the idea that there's a senator standing in front of me, why should I, find him guilty? And so even without talking, they exert so much influence, and they're walking around with all of this power, and it is virtually unchecked.
Mm.
So
That's now.
that is the way things are now. And if this gets passed, then you just added to all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
That's why
It's because
that's one of the reasons why we're opposing it.
it's becoming very clear as to why the stand is very talagang adamant kayo,
Hard.
attorney.
Popular.
You
Yun na nga.
gotta take away
Uh,
they're yielding too much power, and now you're adding to that even more. And it's not
yeah,
because
remember their immunities pa.
I understand the concept
They can
behind what
libel us.
they can. Yeah.
They have the power of life and death.
Yeah, they have the
So,
they can, as long as they're inside Congress or in the Senate, they take a privileged speech. They can libel us, and that will be on the record, in the congressional records. It goes down in history, and you have no chance to rebut it. You do not get a right to rebut. You have no right of reply. You can go to the newspapers and all of that, but what really gets written down in the history books? It's that privileged speech. And there's no libel that it's going to apply to all of this. That's their parliamentary immunity.
Is
That
that
gets extended even to, hello, Senate hearings. Senate hearings. You call in a consultant or resource person, and then mumurahin mo siya. And then if he doesn't come back, you haul his ass into jail. How much power more do you want to give to Congress? Seriously, Ron? Why are we doing this?
attorney?
yeah.
Yung na yan,
Why?
yung rules ng actually the powers of the Senate to have a privileged speech, was that adopted from another constitution, or is
That's
that
in the
something?
That is in the Constitution.
that's in the Constitution.
Yeah, but is it unique
And
to the
that's been
Philippines?
in the 1935.
No, I mean,
No,
is it unique to the Philippines?
no,
Is it?
the U.S. Congress has that.
Okay. So,
Yeah, the
There
U.S.
hasn't
Congress
been
has
any
that.
addition to the
Uh,
rules of legislative procedure since the American.
mm-hmm.
Walang bago. Itong meron tayo ngayon, galing pa yan sa kanila.
It was
oh,
in the
ito,
1935
So
Constitution.
but they have the power
Yeah.
to enact this. They have the power to make their own rules, but
Mm.
they haven't. Why? I don't know. Maybe they don't know how, or maybe they don't need to. But that's where we are now. There is so much that we should do to the legislature to discipline them, to control them, but they don't want that to happen. And then we are giving them so much more power. Uh, I don't know how to go about that.
The other thing, Ron, is that, di ba, you want this to be quick, and I understand that that's what Speaker Velasco also wants. But
yes.
why is a vote not being called to constitute the Congress into a constituent assembly? Right?
Mm.
What's the
Um,
lie?
Diba, there are three ways to amend or revise the Constitution: constitutional convention, a constitutional assembly, and people's initiative.
Initiative there, wala
In the
nang-
Constitutional Assembly, there's no election, there's no convention or anything like that, but you transform Congress and the Senate into the Constituent Assembly with the purpose of amending the Constitution. Now, how do you do that? First, you constitute yourself into the assembly, and you do that by a resolution and a vote. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a law. And then that's when you put on the agenda certain things. I understand that Congress has not yet constituted itself. What
No,
they're
they haven't.
doing is simply talking about the resolution. They're already hearing the resolution without forming a constituent assembly. Why is this important? Because you don't have the Senate, and you can't pass this without the Senate. Diba? So
Mm.
what are we doing? Why are they talking about this if you're just going to be talking about it? You're giving people false hope. You're saying you're going to change the Constitution. You're going to do all of these things when actually you haven't even started the process yet, except the rigmarole of getting people to say, yes, we want this provision. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or getting us to fight for them.
Oh, and then there's not even going to be a debate because of the consensus building that's being done by the speaker. But there's not going to be a debate on this, or going to be a very pro forma debate. But where is your constituent assembly? There doesn't even have to be there. There isn't even a resolution saying, okay, now we're a constituent assembly. We're sitting as this body that's going to amend and revise the Constitution. And this is important because it is precisely in that Constitution that requires you to convert yourself to be that. It's not written in the 1987 Constitution, but that is how the jurisprudence dictates it. And so if they skip this crucial step, then you may as well be throwing everything into the dustbin, twiddle your thumbs and not bother calling off all of your resource persons, because it's going to go to the Supreme Court and they're going to say, well, you can only revise it if you have constituted yourself into the body that's going to revise the Constitution. So
I have a question
I'm
about that.
wondering why that's not happening.
I have a question about that,
Oh,
Trix, if you can explain. Because there's an ongoing issue about whether or not the Senate and Congress should be separate in voting for a particular amendment, right? Or so tama ba yun? Kasi I was reading the Constitution. I had to review it again. It says it says in Article 6, Section 1, the legislative power shall be vested in the Congress of the Philippines, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives, except to the extent reserved to the people by provision on initiative and referendum. So, does that mean that if they're going to come up, if there is a constituent assembly and they will vote for the amendments, hindi ba dapat they're together? Pero ang contention na dapat separate. Ano bang interpretation?
Okay.
Together and vote separately.
They can vote separately, but together the assembly they discuss it together. But the voting should be separate. I'm of the opinion that they should be separate, but actually the Constitution doesn't say anything. So that's another thing na magbabakbakan sila, which is why I think it's a theory. I think the Senate is not interested because the big debate really is on whether or not they're voting together or they're voting separately. Good luck with that. Yeah, stock up on the popcorn for that one.
Yeah, the issue there, Ron, kaya yan ganyan, is marami ang congressmen. Iilan lang, 24 lang yung senators. At kung magbobotohan sila as one, ma-overcome yung Senate.
Yeah, oo nga.
Iilan lang silang kagusto. So, there is a mechanism that would allow them to vote separately, such that 3/4 lang or majority ang kailangan in one house, and ganon din similarly on the other house, and see kung sino mananalo. But they're not working on that.
But Attorney Ahmed, is there anything stated in our Constitution or in our laws that the Senate is kumbaga superior than our Congress?
Of course not.
Definitely not. No, they are not.
I'm sure Congress will say
And
that it
there
would
is
be
nothing that says that the House of Representatives, just because they are many, that there are more of their numbers, and that their coverage is more diverse, kasi iba yung kanilang district, and therefore that they are the superior body. Of course not. They are one body.
Yeah, they're one. Just two different. That's why they're called chambers of the same thing. So
Yeah,
it's two parts of a whole.
Ang concern ko, Atty. Trix, kasi the only reason why I think they want to vote separately is because the Senate feels that,
They're
we're
outnumbered.
they're outnumbered first and foremost. They're outnumbered, but they think their vote is too important to be part of a bigger body. Diba?
That's a good way of putting it, actually.
Kasi yun ang feeling ko eh. Kasi parang ma-dilute yung numbers sila eh. Kasi 24 sila.
Yeah.
Tapos
Totoo
pag
naman.
and
Pero,
pag hindi nila in-approve yung amendment, pasurang agad yung amendment, talo. 'Di ba kasi hindi in-approve ng Senate. So ibig sabihin may power sila over Congress kahit papaano. 'Di ba? Kahit na mas marami sila.
Ano yan, Sharon? Let me clarify that, because if there is politics among the three powers of government, legislative, judiciary, and the executive, the more apparent politicking here, especially when it comes to the budget and franchises and the constitutional amendment, is between the two houses. Remember that this is purely a legislative exercise, because when it comes to these issues, the sovereignty that is important is that which is present in the legislative. Ang sovereignty of the Supreme Court does not matter here. The executive does not matter here. So that when I am told that this is what the president says, I am bound to ignore that statement. That this is what the president wants, because whatever he wants, it's really up to the legislative in the two bodies of this body, one body, that the politics now will happen. And if we are waylaid into watching this kind of circus, which they haven't started, by the way, then we will lose track of what are the things that are supposed to that we're supposed to watch out. And then suddenly magpapa-referendum na, and then railroad na yung decision, and then suddenly they are so powerful. Unfortunately, the two of us exist, and we caught it soon. So
no, I think anybody else would have caught that also, but they
I'm
might
not
have.
saying they can.
Yeah, well, I mean that they might have caught it later na and then by that time they would have to take it to the Supreme Court. So what I'm saying is that the way it's drafted right now doesn't make it easier or faster. It just makes it more contentious. So if you make it more precise, then people know what they're voting for. They know what they're getting. So if you give to Congress the power to determine the nationality requirements, and that I'd be very happy. I know, promote it all over the country if that was but I don't think it would need promoting anymore, because it would be very clear that that's what's going to happen.
There will be no need to balance that power, because nothing substantive was changed. It's just really specifying what you can change to adopt this legal mechanism to make it more responsive to economic needs. So there is no more objection from me on that matter. Hindi na ako mag-object, hindi na ako hingi na power for the executive and to the judiciary, and I won't have a problem with the existence of democracy when my son grows up.
Hindi mo naawayin si Orion na attorney.
Actually, I have been ignoring Orion because he is not the enemy. You must understand that this is Congress, and we reacted to Congress. Orion really just got lost there, and it was suddenly fun for me to fight with someone. But really, that is not the objective here. If someone is so egotistical to say that this is about me or about Orion, there is a misunderstanding of things.
No, yeah, that's true. Because what we're opposing is RDH too. Just remember that. It's just that sometimes when people get stray into our walls, we have a little fun. But so
Yeah. Parang nag-post ka sa page ng Alaskador, talagang expect to be Alaskahin ka nung.
I mean, kami, pag nagsimula kami ng gulo, we are ready to face that kind of, and we can roll with it. I mean, it is painful for us. We get libeled and all that, but we can dish out a little bit painful libels of ourselves too, of our own. But this guy, he is really my friend. Before sudden paroxysm that happened, and before I started to I decided to have fun with him. Uh, Really, there was nothing there between us. I offered to advise him on certain things.
You love
Okay.
him.
There's another ano pala,
I'm kidding. Okay, sorry.
Attorney Trix, Attorney Ahmed, I've been picking up. It's really good that I've been able to pick your brains, about constitutional reform. Because it would have been a big help if you were part of that committee. Na you were. Because this is the first time I've heard of a suggestion to actually just change the nationality. That's very smart.
Nationality
That's
requirements.
elegant. That's an elegant solution. We thought of it
Diba?
last night.
Really?
For stats. We thought of it from the moment we opposed it.
So we thought of it about how we thought of how to express it.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
the way I wanted to express it is give the power to Congress to set the proportion of ownership. Proportion, that was my wording. The Trixie now says the amount of the percentage of nationality. That's sweet.
Yes.
That is excellent and diba, elegant siya. So there it is. We do not start fires without knowing how to kill that fire that we caused. And it's not too late. If Congress would still find themselves in quandary, they probably have to know our phone number.
No, but yeah. I mean, this is not just a Facebook or a social media thing. Like I said, even before we started discussing this online or even in the radio programs, we call the people. It's not like as if we're doing it left field. What I did was I forgot to call you. So sorry, but I did call sorry certain people, and they were saying that the land ownership was not part of it. To be
Yeah.
fair, Orion already also mentioned that in their movement, they really did not espouse the touching any of the provisions on land ownership, just the 60-40 requirement. Unfortunately, one of the provisions in the Constitution, and correctly as pointed out, includes as you pointed out, the 60-40 composition of corporations that can own land in the country. Diba?
Mm,
So
mm,
there's no way that you're not going to be talking about that. Even it's
mm,
still 60-40 when it comes
mm,
to the ownership of land, of private lands. So if a
mm,
corporation wanted to set up here, of course, they would want to own the land so there's stability. Kasi if you're leasing, for instance, and you're leasing private land from a private owner might decide, oh, tomorrow I'm going to raise my rent 3,000 times.
right.
Diba? And so I understand that this would cause a hesitation on the part of the investors. So they
Yes.
should be allowed to own land. And that's why the 60-40 requirement.
Mm,
Diba? Um,
mm,
that's that's why we want it limited to that one. So if we say that okay, in this particular case, Congress can also determine can change the nationality requirement, increase or decrease it as it sees fit. So
mm,
we leave that blank. Hindi yung
mm,
there's one provision, section 7, that allows only for an increase. This is education. 60-40 din sa education eh.
It
So
should be allowed
Congress
to go up and
has
down.
the discretion to increase that so it becomes like foreign ownership is a lot less. So what we want to do is also open that up and say that Congress can also put in a lesser amount. 'Di ba? You don't put in kasi nakalagay doon Congress has the discretion to increase. And then right after that is the clause unless otherwise provided by law. So you just negated your previous statement. 'Di ba?
mm.
Because it's Congress that's exercising both discretions.
Yeah.
So, tanggalin mo yung isa. And then just say that Congress gets to determine the nationality requirements.
Na, 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 I
You
remember
don't
tuloy,
know.
Attorney
Yeah,
Ahmed,
yeah,
I
go
remember,
ahead.
naalala ko tuloy yung what you posted about that. I think the first few posts on that particular issue, yung the line the contentious line, unless otherwise provided by law. Nasabi mo na, what's the term that you used about that? It's supposed to be a control mechanism. But if it's gonna totally change everything, then that will be subjected to what was your abuse? Abuse, no? Yung abusing word mo.
Yeah. All right. I understand that it is very, very attractive for Congress and for people who are supporting this move, which is a group that I am part of, to take the first easy, apparently easy solution
Hmm.
to do these things. But we cannot do that to the Constitution. Everything or anything but the Constitution. The Constitution needs our complete attention and dedication and study and work, hard work para maayos because hindi to pwedeng baguhin every now and then, like in 2 years and 3 years. Constitutions are very hard to change. And if you put in haphazard things there and half-baked, half-thought things, we won't go forward.
Um,
We will defeat all the purposes that we set out to achieve in the first place.
Paano, attorney, yung ano sinasabi nila na, kasi, di ba, remember, Malacanang issued an executive order 2019, or 2018 yata yun, they had a revised negative list.
Yeah.
Yun. But according to some of our, I don't know if it's Secretary Dominguez or Secretary Pernia at that time, said it
Yeah.
wasn't enough. Hindi daw enough yung negative. That's what yun ang sabi nila.
Is that you?
Amen.
Is that me?
Right.
All right. It is not enough. They will have to explain it a little
So
more.
why is it not enough?
Because we made our own examination of it. Lima lang ang galing sa Constitution in that list. More than 30 industries come from are scattered in many laws. So that if there is anything that you want to change, if you want to strengthen that negative list, it should be the laws and not the constitutions.
Okay. All right. I wanted to tackle Sana 30 tricks before. I know it's. I hope you guys don't mind that we are actually doing this for almost 2 hours already. Just let me know, 30 tricks, if you're tired already. If you wanna, get.
Yeah, a few more. I have karambola in the morning, but sige.
Because
Um,
the conversation has gotten so interesting, and I'm sure you also have like questions on your own page that you wanna address. But
well, there's one. There's one consistent one. People are asking if the president can veto a proposition by Congress. No,
right.
since this is a constitutional amendment, it goes into plebiscite. So we will decide yes or no. So, but the problem is, yun na nga, how can you even make a decision on that one if you don't know what you're getting? So, this has to be redrafted. I understand that the process isn't done yet, di ba? Pag-uusapan pa yan. But because of the consensus building of the speaker, my guess is that in a few weeks, he'll just ask Congress to vote. But that vote must be a 3/4 vote of the entire Congress. And the Senate will also be requiring, if they're going to vote at all, that they be voting separately. And that's going to be another big debate. I don't know if the speaker is building consensus for that one. That, plus you also have to contend with the fact that the Senate appears to be not interested in charter change at this time. So, hey, that's not our fault. We're not against this.
We were just misunderstood.
Yeah.
I was able to come across one of our friends, because Attorney Tricks, I don't know if you know him, but they actually have they're called blueprint.ph, and what they do is they scour the social media sphere, and then they come up with these very interesting data.
Such as?
And one of the things I came across is this top trending keywords on Facebook. And then it so happens that the number one thing that in the top two topics that are being discussed on social media are about our religion, Catholic, uh, our
Really?
Catholic disposition, and Christianity. One and two,
Okay.
actually, as top two trending keywords on social media, on Facebook, actually, to be more specific. And
Hmm.
I'm just wondering. I just wanted to ask you, as on a side note, since we are talking about the constitutional reform, and you mentioned, Attorney Trix, that the Constitution reflects the, the aspirations of the people, diba, that it was written for, and it's stated in our Constitution that there should be a separation between church and state.
Separation of church and state. Yeah.
But the thing is, just
Right.
recently, a few weeks ago, we had uh, what's this annual thing that happens in the city of Manila.
Translation.
Translation.
Diba?
Uh,
Translation. And then
translation. Yeah.
translation. And
Tras. No N.
translation. Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
And
Uh,
so I'm just wondering, does this particular? Let me just show you para at least people can see what I'm talking about. This is something that I got from one of our friends, and he shared this post, and here are the top trending keywords on social media, and you
okay.
can see in bold letters
Catholic,
where
Christianity, COVID-19.
COVID-19, third lang
Uh,
COVID-19. So
mhm.
it seems like this what is happening in social media, specifically Facebook,
Mhm.
reflects the behavior of our people, because they went in droves. No, they went to that. That it's supposed to be illegal to do that, but the government wasn't able to do anything about it. Uh, even the church leaders who encourage that people attend such activity are not even they're not accountable to
Mhm.
whatever happens after that mass gathering. What's your take on this, Attorney? Is that it seems like that we are not happy. We don't want the church to be meddling with the affairs of the state, but it would appear that they're still very influential, and the state can't do anything about it.
Hmm. I don't think this is a separation of church and state issue. It's more an issue of how do you fight culture? How do you fight a belief that's bigger than themselves, diba? How many people attend the translation every year, non-COVID years? There was a
Millions, right?
time where it was in the millions, diba? And it's just really showing the strength of the power of culture and belief. And I think that it's very, very difficult to fight that. One of the expressions of that difficulty is our traffic rules. How do you make people obey traffic rules? Do you notice
Mm,
diba, we're actually talking about this the other day, is that Filipinos tend to think of the entire country as their home. And unlike Americans who think of their home as only confined to their actual house.
right.
So we go out in chinelas or very informal. We, tell the barangay captain, wag mo na muna akong kulong ngayon. Di ba? Magkakilala naman tayo, parang kapatid. Very, very informal. So that might be it. But the other is that, yun nga uh, we should be, uh, at least until we have reformed the belief or the practice, trying to figure out how to work with it or around it. So I understand that I'm not sure if it was the office of the mayor or the church itself, but the church itself allowed visitations to the Nazareno. I was wondering if they could have allowed it online, if it was
Mm,
possible to have allowed it just online, so that people can still visit, but that there would be no actual crowds in the church, and that the church should have been shut. We need to find a way to allow them to still express their faith and their belief and their practice, but in a way that would not have harmed us. I think at some point the church just said, "O sige, basta ano, bahala na."
Bahala na.
Pumila na lang sila, social distancing and masks. which I think is disastrous for us.
Ron.
I completely disagree with what happened that time, pero I also understand the strength and the power of his belief.
Tama. And if we are already finding it hard to control that small a group, imagine the entire sovereign people of the Philippines. Imagine trying to convince them which of these amendments they
Yeah.
want to put and
Mm.
other. It will be a really, really big, chaotic thing.
Uh,
But we have to go through that because this is the process that democracy promised us and required of us to do to
yeah,
maintain itself.
democracy is messy.
Yeah.
It is. It's not. Diba? It would have been easier to be totalitarian
So it's
if we
always like
wanted,
that.
But yeah. Well, there's
Yeah.
some people who are still, I'd like also to address the people who are invested in a certain idea. Na, yun nga, that after we had cleared up that the problem is draftsmanship and that we can actually redraft the provisions to reflect our need to lift the 60-40. 60-40 to be lifted doesn't have to mean that it has to be erased.
Yeah.
We
Mm.
just give Congress nga, as you were trying to do, you give Congress the discretion to determine the nationality requirements. It's a more precise way of saying other rather than saying unless otherwise provided by law. So I hope you don't get too invested into saying that no, the whole thing has to be removed. That is how it is removed by giving Congress the right to determine, and it also gets flexibility if they need na. I think these industries are protected now, or like I don't think there's any more danger in 100% foreign-owned schools. Why not raise it to 100, diba, instead of decreasing it, diba?
Mm.
So it's safer to do it that way. And I don't understand why people are invested in and still angry and saying, tanggalin ang 60-40. Maybe it might take some time to catch up. So all we're saying here is it's a redraft. Okay? We're not saying ayaw namin, we want the 60-40 to stay, no? The discretion, again, is left to Congress to determine that. I'm not sold on the private lands and natural resources because I understand the president wants to protect those too as well. Diba? I don't
Yes.
think there's anything said about natural resources either because we reserve the right to do that, but it's 60-40 for natural resources. So it's not remove the 60-40 completely either because 60-40 din dun sa 'di ba, dun sa private lands. But if we're going to talk only about the corporations, then that's what we're going to to
Mm.
limit to allow Congress to determine just the discretion on private lands. We're working exactly with what you intend, only being more precise with it.
Instead.
So yeah.
Attorney,
And
I'm hoping that they can be flexible enough that suggestions that can better the
mm,
proposal. We're not
yun
only
nga,
here.
yeah.
The,
So first of all, I think we should remove the unless otherwise provided for by law when it comes to the public lands. Okay, so those
mm,
are two sections.
right.
I understand two and three.
Mm,
Okay. So strike out
think
completely from RBH two.
all of them, kahit sa education and
And
other sections,
dun sa iba, we
meron din.
will yeah, we'll remove all of that. We'll remove the phrase unless otherwise provided for by law and then replace the ones with the 60-40 restrictions with the clause that says Congress gets to determine the nationality requirements. It's very
yeah.
fairly simple. And
Yeah.
I think that if they're really in a hurry, then and this reflects exactly what we want, then Congress should have no problem getting it done. We might actually get to amend the Constitution because the Senate won't feel threatened about it anymore either. Diba? Kasi hindi na malawak eh.
Uh,
And I think Congress is just using the Senate is only using the debate on whether they should be voting separately to not touch those provisions because it's as Secretary Dominguez says it's pretty emotional.
I,
So
found
yeah.
it very amusing, attorneys, yung
Mhm.
when we got the chance to speak to the former chairman for constitutional amendments, Rufus
Yeah.
Rodriguez mentioned he was very
Mm.
he's a strong advocate for regionalizing the Senate, and I'm sure that would have been struck down easily by by their counterparts. I mean, can you imagine a regionalized Senate? None of those
I
people.
like the idea of a regionalized Senate.
Sa tingin mo, no? Di ba sa US, ganun naman eh. Why not, right?
Yeah,
Federal idea.
kasi that's a federal idea.
And we
Oh.
are for a federal setup, especially in the distribution of power of Congress, especially.
Mhm.
Kasi diyan tayo magsimula ang federalism, federalism, basically focuses on the setup of the legislature.
Mm.
And it assumes that wherever the legislature goes, the executive goes, because that's how parliamentary federal system setup is explained or expressed.
Mhm.
Magkaiba yan sa Amerika. Federal lang Amerika, pero hindi sila parliamentary.
Yeah.
Attorney
Diba?
Trix, what can you say about Ronan Diet's comment, systemic change will shape behavior? Is that something that you can say accurately?
It happens, yeah. Well, kasi law is also used as a form of social engineering, diba?
Okay.
But law also has to find a value first. So you find a value, or you find something that you want to either protect or destroy. So you want to destroy certain criminal behavior, you identify that behavior, you provide penalties for that, and then in the hopes of reforming people. So that's what you call the deterrent effect of the of criminal laws. Now, some laws they not necessarily have to be criminal, but they will still shape the behavior of people. For example, no jaywalking. Diba? People tend to take the path of least resistance in their walking patterns, and they sometimes will cross in the middle of the road and get run down by trucks. So you institute a rule, no jaywalking and all of that, and then you enforce that and you change people's behavior. So I'm not sure about systemic change, but it should. All forms of change will have a necessary effect on behavior. Whether that behavior will be affected in the way that you think it will or not is something else. Diba? But yeah, in general, yes, that's the general idea. But I think it should be more precise. Is that some laws are passed precisely to change behavior. Yeah, that's why look at all our penal laws. Does it change behavior? Well, to some extent. For instance, those who have been caught jaywalking 3 or 4 times, they probably will never do that again. On the other hand, the murders have been happening since there have been human beings. And you can put as many penalties as you want and as many death penalties on the head of a murderer as you want, but there will still be murders years from now. There's some aspects of human behavior that are just really human behavior, and the best that you can do is punish it and know that there are consequences for all of these things. So which one is it going to be? So some laws change behavior, some laws are just there because we understand that human behavior, the weaknesses of the human being, and that we address those behaviors rather than try to change them. Maybe sometime in the future, like centuries from now or 1,000 years from now, people won't be killing each other anymore. But I seriously doubt that.
There is another reading of that statement, which would give another insight. For example, a systemic change. If you change the system, can you expect the people to change around it as well? All right. And my understanding is that if you change the government, for example, into federalism, people would follow eventually get inured to all of these things and change. But you must understand that laws do not apply to systems. They apply to human beings. Systems are constructs in our head. It is actually the people that control by laws and not systems or ideals or abstracts like a system of a legislature or like a system of government or or a system of changing the constitution. There is not much you can do about that, but theoretically you can change it. But what you would want to go for is to change the minds of the people to get their hearts and minds in order for you to find an easy way of changing the system. So it's a
Mm,
switch, right? You don't change the system in order to change the people. You control the people. You make them understand. You modify their behavior so that you can guide them along the way where you want the change of the system to happen.
mm.
In the
Okay.
end.
Mm,
So it's not
diba?
as uh, it's not as as simple as actually just setting up the system and then people should follow. No, you
No,
expect
it
people to
won't.
follow. It's more complex than it
Yes,
actually is.
correct. Mhm.
Yeah,
Attorney,
yeah.
one of your listeners actually is very worried about you because you have carambola tomorrow morning. So
He's
maybe
right. Thank
we
you.
can we can end our conversation tonight by getting your final words on if you were. Probably the question is if you were asked if you had the privilege of actually giving advice to Congress right now and or to the president for that matter, what would you tell them on how to go about constitutional reform for it to be more effective and for it to be more meaningful in terms of the actual reforms that the president is espousing since 2016?
Um, okay. Well, for me, the words of wisdom came from Kong Jonat de la Cruz, who is my co-host on Carambola. He says that uh, constitutional reform or changes or amendments to the Constitution should not be conducted towards the end of a president's term because it makes it look self-serving. It is
Okay.
almost always proposed, if it is a serious one, it is proposed at the start, right? Especially also at a time when the president holds a high degree of confidence. And so you can actually steamroll a constitutional change or amendment to the Constitution. So for me, the timing might also be a factor here. Again, I'd like to underscore there's so much that needs to be changed about our Constitution, but I'm also not the type who will hurry about it. I
Hmm.
don't like the idea of rushing something simply because there is a political expedient for it. We write constitutions to last. We write them to set standards of behavior for our congressmen and senators as well as all other public officials. The Constitution is a document by which we constitute ourselves as a nation. And it reflects not just our history and our experience, but our current values. More importantly, as a legal document, it tells government what it can and cannot do.
Hmm.
So if our constitution is a little chatty, okay, talkative, verbose, oral diarrhea, and all that, it's because there's so much, we are nagging our government officials. And I think that given the kind of officials that we have right now, we do have to nag them constantly and, if possible, hit them over the head with something. But but that's it. If we want to change something, first we understand it. 'Di ba? Yeah, the lawyers, and don't take it against lawyers when we see the imprecision. You know what lawyers were called before? We were called wordsmiths.
Wordsmith.
That was our tool. The tool that we use, that lawyers use, are words. And we know the power of words. A misplaced word, 'di ba, can turn an innocuous phrase into a death penalty. 'Di ba?
Hmm.
Buti nga, hindi tonal yung language natin. In the Chinese language, you change a tone, you turn your mother into a horse. Right? But here, in law, you have to be very precise so that we are now, it's part of the notice requirement. The law requires us to know our laws so that we can be held accountable for them. We have to know our constitution, even if you want to get angry at it, even if you think it's worthless piece of bull manure, that worthless piece of bull manure has to be examined in order for us to change it. Right? So that's part of what we're doing here is that pointing out that this was why this provision was put in. We can change our minds by all means, but the knowing the stories of this is also knowing your history. And that's the Philippine story right there. And we're just all of these people in that entire story. But the understanding of the Filipino, the understanding of our Constitution is an intrinsic part of our history, also
Mm.
informs us about who we are and how we are. So every time we talk about it, that's what we're talking about too. Diba? It's not about getting angry at anybody who made a mistake or who was vile and evil and tried to perpetuate themselves in power. It's no longer about that. It's about charting where we're going to be, because by this time we should know who we are.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna complain about that
yeah,
part, that the transitory provision that's still there in the 1987 Constitution that doesn't have any use whatsoever.
but they had
Is
use
They had used earlier.
kasi they had to, they started over. Diba? They
okay.
they took everything out. So they needed, before you had to have a plebiscite, diba? And a referendum. So they needed rules to govern that. Why they put it in the Constitution, I will never know. Because
Kaya
you
nga
had to plebiscite.
Yeah.
But that's what they were for.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
yeah,
suppose they were new, and they didn't know, they weren't in power, so they didn't know how to run government. You remember how Noy Noy started his own government? People were calling it a student government. Okay, at least in 1986, 87, they were a lot smarter than that. Not by a lot, but smarter than that. So that's how they were doing it. And in a lot of ways, they had to reinvent everything. So of course there would be mistakes. God, there are mistakes. But we have to understand that that's how it happened. It's not about getting angry at them. It's too late
so
for that. But
it's clear,
we can
Attorney,
change it.
you are not a diehard protector of the 1987 Constitution.
Oh, hell no. Whoever said that?
No, no,
Nobody, nobody is saying that,
that's why,
man.
para clear ba? Baka gamitin na naman yung
Uh,
mga ganyang klaseng mga usap-usapan. Attorney
uh,
Ahmed, what's
Hmm.
your take
mm,
on our
All
conversation
right.
tonight?
Uh, we had the present constitution in 1986, and that was enacted. It was promulgated in 1987.
mm,
There are transitory provisions there, and there are grants of rights and obligations to Congress and to the people there
mm.
that until now we still don't have. FIO, Freedom of
FOI.
Information, FOI.
Mm,
There is
Attorney Trixie
there
ba?
is the rules implementing rules for the initiative on the laws.
we don't even have a law on FOI right now.
Exactly.
Diba?
But we've been pushing that since 2017, di ba, Attorney Trixie, when we're still with the PCO. Wala pa bang
Yeah.
nangyari
Yeah.
dun?
Yep.
Congress didn't pass
They
it. The
didn't
same
pass
Congress that you're entrusting with, unless otherwise provided by law.
So that's my
Okay.
point. Let me continue on that.
Okay.
Change in the Constitution. If you think that we have to railroad this change now that that is before us, remember that the Constitution that was not crushed during 1996, post 1986, still has so many parts that until now haven't been implemented and haven't been
Mm.
put in reality. If you think that the granting Congress so much power because you want it to be quick would achieve what you want, faster economic growth, think again. Because that is really not necessary. It is not necessary follow. It's a non-sequitur. So what we want is to identify the problem areas of the Constitution and then modify a little bit, tweak these certain portions of the Constitution to achieve what we want. So that if there is just a little bit of adjustment in what Congress can do, then let's do that specifically, surgically, and precisely on those things only. Otherwise, if you are so uh, how do you call this, chivalric about it, or just be so generous because you want them to handle the thinking for you, uh, you will go back to the problem of the FOI question or the initiative question that until now, mababago na nga lang ang Constitution, hindi pa rin natin gagawa.
Mm.
Okay? So, Mr.
Yes.
President, what I would tell you is we are in support of what we want, but we are definitely not in support of doing it stupidly.
Mhm. Ulitin ko lang we're not against
Mm,
FDI. In fact,
mm,
the provisions that we want change, is to change unless otherwise provided by law into Congress, to granting Congress the discretion to determine nationality requirements. That is
yeah.
not the same as saying we don't want FDI, diba? If we leave Congress with the discretion to determine uh, how much equity a foreigner gets to have
Mm,
in order to set up businesses here. Oh, but I'd like to point out before anybody thinks otherwise, that the manufacturing sector can be 100% foreign owned. There is
is
no
that so?
prescription in the Constitution that says they can't.
But nobody is.
Mm.
Why isn't an influx of manufacturing
Uh,
foreign companies coming in?
mm-hmm.
Maybe it's because it's not a question of loosening this, but a question of the how conducive the place is, which is to say our country is for such kind of businesses,
Mm-hmm.
and it would again bring us all back to how we are as a cultural community,
Mm-hmm.
how we are as a law-abiding community, and all that stuff. So let's just touch the parts that really necessarily need to be touched, and leave the tweaking and the large scale change to who we are.
So, one last thing, attorney, before I say goodbye. Public
Mm-hmm.
utilities. One of the reasons why a lot of investment is hard to come by is because of the fact that we have such high electricity rates. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah. Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
Doing
One
business.
of the highest though in the region,
Labor.
I understand. Labor
Very
unrest caused
difficult.
by our terrorist, oops, excuse me, leftist organizations. Sorry.
Will it
Um,
be if we
yeah.
open up the FDIs on public utilities as well? Is that feasible to have a foreign entity to come in so that?
I think it's encouraged,
Same
yeah.
same scheme.
Kasi public
Congress.
utility 60-40, di
Yeah.
ba? So
Hmm,
Congress
Congress.
should be able to determine the nationality requirements and say pwedeng 100%. Why not? Uh,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
The
So
debate will be on mass media. Are we willing for that to be 100% foreign owned?
We are not
lusot ng
talk. We
rapper,
don't
tsaka
talk about the
ABS-CBN.
Sukmaan or reporter.
Kasi, kasi
Lus-
that's it. That's in the things that you changed,
Yeah.
Ron.
It's part
yeah.
of
It's part of
normal
it. You
change.
put that in unless otherwise provided by
Mm.
law.
Lusot na si Reza,
So
tsaka si Lopez.
you guys did that.
Yeah.
Okay.
We caught it.
That's
We
your
caught it
that's
for you.
your you guys put that in there. IATF put that in there. So you
Baka kaya,
answer that one.
attorney, baka kaya siguro biglang supportive ang mga congressmen. Kasi, uy, pwede nating,
Yeah, kasi basically what you're saying is pwede na ang ABS-CBN kahit Amerikano pa si Gabby Lopez, di
And
ba?
more. And more.
And more. And now all their American relatives and friends can or everybody can say, uy, pwede na ako mag-dual citizen. Punta na ako sa US.
Not if
And I can
help.
still own ABS-CBN, di ba? Et al.
Remember, we were also the ones who really made it very hard for Congress to sort out ABS-CBN. Again, here we are again, making it
Oo
very
nga,
hard for
attorney
them to
Ahmed.
sort out the Constitution.
Grabe,
You're welcome.
alam mo, attorney, parang just one last comment on the ABS-CBN issue. Parang, the thing about Congress is they're not really, they're not even embarrassed about the fact that they're trying to reopen it when it's already been resolved.
And you want to trust them.
So much for trusting.
Come on,
if,
man.
if you want to be a politician, you have to have a thick skin talaga. Kaya, yung, yung mga klase, natutuwa na lang ako.
Well, to be on
Sorry.
social media, you have to also. So I think it works that way also.
That's so true, Attorney Trix. So with that, siguro, Attorney Trix, I know you have a thing tomorrow, and I'd like to thank you. Oh, I hope, Attorney Trix, Attorney Ahmed, this is not the last time I can invite you to Istoryang Futbolero. It's
Of
been a
course
very
not.
Don't be ridiculous.
conversation. It's always nice catching up with the two of you. I miss you guys. You know, yung ating,
Yeah. Can we, can we all get, can we get COVID over and done with so we can go back and drink
I know, right? Saka,
at Jolie's place? Yeah.
I hope people will stop sharing those fake memes on the prices of the vaccines kasi it's not
Oh,
helping.
nga.
Diba?
It's disastrous. Ay, nako. Oh,
So, Attorney Ahmed, thank you so
Yeah.
much. I really
hi to
appreciate it.
Yusek Malaya, ha? Please tell him hi.
Oh, yeah, we'll do. And also to everyone who is watching.
And Yusek Dino.
Oo nga pala, no? Tama. Alam mo naman
Oh,
yung kasama natin sa DILG. They're also watching. Si Sir Iro also, who's one of the consultants, is also listening. And probably Sir Bobby Capco. Get well
hi,
soon,
Sir
sir.
Bobby.
And si Secretary Gary Olivar, who was on Istoryang
Oh.
Futbolero to talk about.
Is he watching? Hi, Sir
I
Gary.
don't know if he's watching right now, but he did guess and talked about yung kanilang debate with Ibon Foundation, which was really
Oh, that was fun. Sir Gary pa, kaya-kaya niya yan with two hands tied behind his back, blindfolded.
Attorney Ahmed, if you don't mind, baka one of these days, probably a couple of weeks from now, we can invite Sec Gary with you guys and have
Yeah.
No problem.
a nice discussion on the economy, diba? And also the reforms, right?
Yeah, sure.
I want to hear his comment on what you just said about the unless otherwise provided by law clause.
Yeah.
Diba?
We are
Maganda
just stickler for these things. We were taught to nitpick these things.
I learned a lot tonight. Thank you, Attorney Trix, for the free lessons on constitutional law. Attorney Ahmed, for talking to us. And I hope, I'm sure at the end of the day, you and Orion are good friends, diba? Wala
Of course,
naman ito.
I was really kidding. It was just fun for me and for us. I am asking him to grace my
Sapakan for fun.
sapakan for fun. It's my charity or activity. But it's just fun, man. That's what I'm talking about. Sometimes we get to work and have fun at the same time.
Yeah. Sure.
By
All right,
attempting to kill each other. Okay. Sige.
All
All right.
Well, don't forget to watch Attorney Trixie, Attorney Ahmed tomorrow. Tambayan rin, Attorney Trix. So you have that noontime. Tama ba?
Tomorrow. Yeah, with Attorney Glenn Chong. He's a
With Attorney
regular on Tuesdays.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Carambola at 9 o'clock, Attorney Trix tomorrow morning.
8 o'clock. 8 o'clock with tomorrow. Attorney Larry Gadon will be with us. He's regular on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Buti na lang may Skyway Stage 3 tapos na. Medyo nabawasan yung traffic sa EDSA. So,
Especially you. I know where you
We don't get to
live.
experience it.
But galing ng Skyway. Eh?
galing
I
galing.
still have to see it for myself. No?
Yeah, we were at the I was at the MMDA today to talk to Chairman
yeah.
Abalos.
Right.
Yeah. It's an old friend.
Galing.
Oh, that's it. Ang galing,
Yes.
ha? Our new MMDA chairman hit the ground running. In 1 week, he got so much done. Yeah.
But
Galing.
yeah, I hope he doesn't bring the motorcycle rule to Metro Manila.
No riding in tandem of Mandaluyong, di ba? So,
Anyway, yeah, that's it.
All right, Attorney
Uh,
Ahmed, Trixie, thank you so much.
thank you, Ron.
And have a good night.
Mhm.
And we'll catch you again on the same program. What day is it today? It's Monday, Wednesday again.
Monday.
be here
Monday.
to see
Monday.
Monday.
Yeah.
We'll have on Wednesday. I think we're gonna, if I'm not mistaken, hindi pala sa Friday pa yata we usually have si Jam Magdo guest on the program as well. Na-interview na ba ninyo ba yun, Attorney Trix? O si Jam?
No, but I'm in chat groups with her. Kasi, so,
Did you want to be interviewed?
All right. Good night, guys. Good night, attorneys.
night.
Have a good one. See you.
Yeah,
Guys,
you too.
don't forget the DOH reminders. Huwag kalimutan magsuot ng mask. Maghugas ng kamay, distansya ng 1 metro. At bawal ang fake news, di ba, attorneys? Bawal fake news.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Night.